Hello and welcome to BoucherCon 2020's Help, I've Been Hacked panel. I'm Ross Carley, and with me are Chris Collins, Doyle Groves, Steve Lodin, and Janet Williams. And we're going to walk you through the world of cyber crimes, information security, cybersecurity, everything from small events up to large cyber terrorism kinds of events. And I'll start off by introducing myself. I'm Ross Carley, and I'm write the Wolf Ruger series of murder mysteries and cyber thrillers. My latest book is Crypto Kill, you see here, but I'm also very proud to be part of the Indianapolis chapter of the Sisters in Crime with Janet Williams. And we have just published an anthology from Sisters in Crime here called Murder 2020. And Janet and I both have short stories in Murder 2020. And so we hope all of you, particularly you Sisters in Crime members, will go out and get our anthology book. I've been writing murder mysteries for a few years and just started dipping my toe into the cybersecurity, information security, cyber crime area, and find that a lot of authors and a lot of readers are not familiar with what's going on. What I read often, I'm afraid, is not a very accurate portrayal. It's like, wait a minute, that can't happen. Or, they're basically getting things wrong. And so I look at the other people you see on this screen to help keep me in the straight and narrow in talking about cybercrime. And we'll go around now and others will introduce themselves. Steve?
Hi there, everyone. My name's Steve Lodin, otherwise known as Steve Modine in the books produced by our lead here. I started off in the engineering world, programming software in advanced displays that went in cars, and realized that I was more interested in managing the computers that created the software that goes into all the computers inside your car. I focused on security early on, protecting the systems and the data. After getting a master's degree in computer science, I've been leading security teams since the mid-90s in consulting, automotive, healthcare, and now in the financial services industry. My job right now, leading the security team for cybersecurity in a top 100 mid-sized bank, is really to focus on deflecting and deterring attackers, both internal and external. Our goals are really to protect the financial resources, the intellectual property of the company, and the customer data. For us, the key attack vectors are email and the web. And really what we're trying to do is prevent malware from coming in. We're trying to deter compromise attempts on our endpoints and also prevent social engineering attacks. We actively share information on our attack surface and what we're seeing happen to us regularly with other banks and financial institutions nationwide. So we're really trying really hard to make sure that those millions of records on our customers and their loan providers is safe and secure.
Okay, great. Next, we'll go to Agent Shields, as he's known in my books. Chris Collins, formerly with the FBI, became Agent Shields as I started writing my cyber series. No, actually the murder mystery part of it first. So Chris, introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Chris Collins, former FBI agent, cybercrime task force. I left the FBI about 2 years ago and joined the private sector. I've been working in the Fortune 1000 area. Was with the FBI for about 7 years. I guess once it became very dull to carry a badge and a gun. I felt it was time to move on to the next big project. And people always said that must be really cool to be an FBI agent. And I said, really? Because every day, nobody wants to see you. Either you're knocking on a door where it's a victim, or you're knocking on a door and it's a subject. So that was pretty much my life. I worked cyber because I made the mistake and told them I knew a little bit about computers when I joined. And even though my background's in psychology, and of course, I've been working in finance all before the FBI. So I've been doing that, and I worked national security and criminal investigations. And when I was also with the FBI, I had the role as private sector coordinator, which is a lot like having you on a bungee cord, because the FBI would say, go out there and talk to the American public, educate them about what we do and what we're here for. Wait, don't mention that stuff. Hold on, no, bring it back. Okay, all right, wait. So it was a back and forth. And it was a very frustrating job, as you can imagine, trying to share information from things that I knew in my head were classified, and then I had to scramble them around and spit them back out to being unclassified so that we could share enough and help people. So I've been working in the private sector now, and I do incident response for cyber matters, as well as business continuity, disaster recovery. So anything from, being affected with malware and having to recover systems all the way down to the impact of COVID and staying in business. So it's been pretty dynamic, but I've been loving it.
Great, thanks, Chris. Doyle.
Hi, I'm Doyle, and over 30 years, I've spanned a lot of different engineering and technical type functions. I started out as a classic kind of systems engineer doing automotive stuff, optics, mechanics, other things. But along the way there, I was exposed to data, lots of big data, we'll call it. Before we said big data out loud in the 90s and in the aughts, there was a lot of data flowing around. And that led to the aughts, which was about more internet engineering than automotive stuff, just purely developing software to manage big things. I got into the human resources side and some other things. And after the aughts, this last decade, I ended up looking at other opportunities for just, again, big data applications, and ended up into the security space, because this is one of the places where there is a very data-driven environment where a lot of things are going on that first and foremost are being measured and recorded and collected, sifted through. There's big warehouses full of stuff that there just aren't enough people and software and tools to go look through. So there's a lot of good challenges there, and it's important work, as we all realize just listening to the people on the team today. I work for one of the largest suppliers of computer security tools that helps the biggest companies get done what they need done. Companies can't do this themselves, and they rely on suppliers like us to do these things. As part of that work, it is doing things like helping a product development team put a product in front of a customer that they can actually use and have an interface for, helping a research team deal with a brand new set of threats or data that they've seen that we haven't seen before. Let's try to make sense of that. So it's kid in a candy store stuff for a big data person, and that's I'm lucky to have ended up there and talking to people like this on a regular basis in our cyber breakfast cabal that happens once in a while.
Okay, and fellow Sisters in Crime Indy chapter member, Janet.
Hi, I am a journalist, spent the better part of the past 40 years as a journalist, and a good chunk of that time either working politics and the politics beat or courts and crime. I'm the rest of this panel. My background is not in cybersecurity or computer technology, but I am a reader and interested, and I'm a geek for gadgets. So I've got 3 computers in my house right now and many cameras and other recording equipment. So I'm a geek for all of this stuff. What I've seen, and I think what I bring to this panel is as both a reader and in my career as a journalist, I've seen the way we've been able to access technology change really dramatically. In the 1990s, I was an investigative reporter at the Indianapolis Star, and there we did quite a bit of reporting on the influence of money in politics. And in order to do that at the time, you had to build your own databases. There was nothing that was online. You had to like sort documents by hand, you had to process them by hand, you had to put them in the system by hand. And if you wanted to do any kind of analysis, you had to figure out, you know, the kinds of common fields that you're going to want to extract. So from that perspective, I do really get that the data in the system is only as good as the process you use to like put it there in the first place. You have to be able to tag it and identify it so you can, you know, pull it out later for what you need. But I spent a good chunk of my early career, if I wanted to find out who owned what property, going to the you know, city county building and physically rifling through you know, the actual paperwork of who owned what. And then it was quite a job to actually make those connections. The exciting part about the era we're living in now is being able to make those connections between like one set of data or another, cross-checking demographic data with the data of people being arrested on drug charges. And the flip side of that is just really understanding how the technology has changed, you know, how we write our stories. It's harder to get a character kind of trapped alone somewhere, because as long as you have a cell phone, you can almost always like hit 911. It's harder to get lost. I can't tell you how many times early in my career this was when I was still in the Pittsburgh area, winding around streets in some of the hilly neighborhoods outside Pittsburgh, looking for an address or an event that, you know, the map didn't show up on the map, and that's all I had to get there. And today, man, you know, GPS it, but you can also keep track of people that way, so it's harder to lose track of people. You know, I have my friends and family. I permit my friends and family to track me when I'm traveling from here to there, just in case something happens along the way for safe. So I've seen like the huge changes, but, you know, imagining Miss Marple with a GPS is a little bit unfathomable, or Hercule Poirot solving a crime using computer technology. His only computer are the little gray cells in his head. So I'd be interested as we kind of go on and hearing from you guys about, you know, some of the technology and the dangers we face. How might a detective like Poirot or Lord Peter Wimsey be different today if we were developing that character in today's high-tech world?
Yeah, I mean, is Miss Marple really just sort of totally out of date? You know, so well, let's start around the horn again with Chris, since we're going to talk about law enforcement first. Tell us what's going on in that area. The three-letter agencies, everything from local police up to international, like let's say the Five Eyes organization type thing, where the nations get together and share information in the information security area.
Sure. Well, as you can imagine, it's a little difficult to catch bad guys in cyber. Everywhere else, it's much easier, but you know, finding these guys has gotten much more difficult, and that comes in, you know, information sharing is a huge problem. So, you know, I could attack this a couple of different ways. So, if we have an issue with sharing information from the public when they're exposed to an incident, or we have a cyber, you know, attacker, because nobody, in many ways, they're contractually obligated to make a notification, especially if they're a publicly traded company. So we all hear about those, but if they're not a publicly traded company, in many cases, you're not going to hear about those incidents. And it's a shame in many ways because we need to share that information. And that goes two ways with all these three-letter agencies, right? So we have to share information. And in many cases, with all these the cases that I had that I was working, it's an ongoing investigation. The government's answer. It's an ongoing investigation. Unfortunately, we cannot make any comment at this time. I had that thing memorized. And sometimes we love that, right? But part of my job was public outreach, and I wanted you to get the information. So it's sharing that information so that we can aggregate it and then use it for prosecution purposes of these individuals. And they're hiding behind VPNs, these virtual private networks. And it's making it much more difficult than if their IP address shows that it's Comcast and it's coming from a 17-year-old in the basement, which I've knocked on plenty of those doors, as you can imagine. And that's a whole nother conversation. But in many cases, they're hiding. And then, it's the difficulty in subpoenas to wherever the VPN server is. And then we have to worry about, where's the server located? Oh, it's in a foreign country. Do we have an agreement with them in that local country so that they'll adhere to our subpoena? And as you can imagine, it becomes much more difficult. So I always joked whenever I saw like NCIS and they had them doing a roundtable and talking about how they're going to get their bad guy. And I turned over one time and looked over at another agent and I said, this is true. This is just like us, except they said in 2 minutes what takes us 3 weeks. And it's much slower, right? Going after these people, because you have to hope, first of all, that in these countries where these state actors are, which is our same way of saying a foreign actor, we have to hope that we have a close relationship with that country. And I had cases, in Tunisia, Africa, where our relations soured very quickly. And then suddenly the cooperation and going after my bad guy and then getting my intelligence became more difficult. So I've experienced this, and it's just extremely frustrating. But the more we get people involved and assisting us and sharing the information so that these people can't hide behind these, we call them bulletproof servers or bulletproof relationships, where they essentially bulletproof in the sense that they don't adhere to our subpoenas, our search warrants, our national security letters, which is the same way as saying a classified subpoena or NSL. That they don't adhere to them because we don't have the relationship in place. And it comes down to how good of a relationship does the United States have with these other places. So that's been my biggest aggravation when it comes to information sharing.
Okay, Doyle, I'm gonna sort of seed you with a question, but tell us what you're going to tell us. But then you work with clients on a daily basis that are large corporations. They're in the Fortune 500 and so on. How many malware attacks a day does a typical large company see?
There's a few different ways to characterize that, because the primary threat vector incoming is the email box. Things are coming in by email, and the quantity of attacks that way you could count in the millions, because we see billions of email messages a day on behalf of, by the way, of the Fortune 100, we have 85 of those as customers. So we see most of what the biggest companies see, and that vantage point lets us see billions of emails from there, millions of those. It's maybe 0.1%, but that's still millions of individual emails that have stuff that each one of those is dangerous. And to make sure somebody doesn't click on stuff, to protect people, to save people from themselves is important. So that's one number. Another one is about the pieces of malware that we look at, because we are part of a big malware exchange where we discover our own samples in the wild, but other people send them to us, and looking at those, that's in maybe the hundreds of thousands. Unique new pieces of stuff where engineers from the dark side, there's software engineering talent there too. There's people with 9-to-5 jobs that are creating bad stuff and then putting it out into production that is, try to get this thing planted in there so that it does stuff. That's a new piece of software that's every bit as sophisticated as other products that you buy computer wise, but that's in the hundreds of thousands. Again, of brand new, unique things that we have never seen before that we have to deal with and evaluate every day. Put that into a Petri dish and poke at it and see if it does stuff. And a lot of stuff doesn't do anything, but you really have to test everything. So volume-wise, numbers-wise, that's a couple of things.
Well, I didn't mean to cut off the rest of your introduction. I think.
Oh no, that's just for that one question. That's just numbers-wise about how many attacks do we see a day. It's hard to define what an attack is, but that's just a couple of different ways to describe attacks and put numbers on just how many of those there are. But it's a high volume thing. It's data driven, and it's, again, fun for people like me to just try to count and get your arms around everything, to manage a system that can hold all that stuff and have people go use that to evaluate what the dark side is doing, because it's an escalation. The dark side is doing more of this all the time, and we're trying to keep up with that. And it's a cat and mouse game that I feel like we're winning and we're good at it, but it just is relentless, and it's important we try to,
Well, see, that's an important. I think that a lot of people don't realize. Certainly, the BoucherCon attendees and even the authors don't realize the absolute magnitude of what we're faced right now with right now. That there, in my opinion, there is almost a full-scale cyber warfare going on, bubbling underneath the surface, that 99% of the people out there don't know about. And Steve, you mentioned something called social engineering, and that was one of the most fascinating things to me. That I think when we talk about incorporating in mystery books, like cozy mysteries, social engineering is about the lowest tech. You don't even need to know much about computers. Tell us about social engineering.
Well, effectively, social engineering is just convincing somebody that that you're trying to get to do something that they don't normally want to do, whatever it may take, whatever insider knowledge, whatever lures, whatever actions you can do to get them to do what you don't want them to do. That may be logging into a website and giving up their credentials. We do this quite frequently, testing our users. Will you take this fake email, and also known as a phish, and do stupid stuff like click on a link or download a piece of software because it looks like it's from an authorized person, but it's not. So social engineering is just tricking somebody to do something they normally wouldn't do.
But I mean, there are even examples of somebody calling up somebody's boss and say, your boss is out of town, but I really need this piece of information out of his computer. Can I have his password? Now, you'd think nobody would be so dumb as to fall for something like that, but they do.
So I'll let Doyle and perhaps Chris talk about this in further detail. But one of the biggest things that we've seen in industry is business email compromise.
There it is.
So you get this email from somebody that doesn't make sense, in the email address that says, "Hey, I'm your CEO. I need to have my direct deposit changed to this bank account. It's an emergency. You can't contact me. Please do it right away so I get my paycheck." And if your staff isn't trained appropriately, they may actually follow through on that and send money where it shouldn't end up to be. There's plenty of cases of that happening. Doyle, how many different email campaigns and volume are you seeing on your side?
It is campaign-wise. It's a small number. It's in the dozens per day. But a campaign it requires an analyst to look at a set of stuff and decide it belongs together and give it a name. And now it's a campaign. There's a lot of other material that is uncampaigned, but to actually put a name on it and a face on it is there. But the to pick up on the BEC thing, the business email compromise thing, and social engineering, that is one of the last things that really does work. We've gotten really good at all the other network security and virus protection and keeping stuff out by firewalls and all the things you've heard about. That stuff is all great, and it works so well that the only thing left is to just trick people into doing stuff, because that will be an endless supply of somebody that you can convince to do something. That is the last big thing that you'll keep hearing about is BEC. That's the good
And
phrase.
it's so effective. I mean,
Yes, right.
it's organized crime, and people don't realize that it is. I mean, gone are the days of the Nigerian prince in the broken grammar trying to get through, which we all laughed and snickered at. But now, we still see it where they buy a domain or spoof a domain from maybe one of your companies, your vendors, sends you an invoice that they're changing the ACH information to, and in hopes that you wire them money. And that's organized crime, because they have to get the funds, and then they use what are known as money mules to have that money sent overseas. So they'll bounce it around through a couple of U.S. stateside accounts before they send it to China or Russia. And those people will end up burning their social security numbers and whatever just to be a part of the scheme and take their cut. And then this company that organized the whole thing, or it's this individual, it's a company because it's organized crime, they take their cut, whatever's left. And if they can do in 15 minutes what actually pays them in a third world country $300,000, I mean, it's highly effective, and I don't see them changing their scheme anytime soon.
One of the most
Wait,
go
can I
ahead,
ask you a
Janet.
question? Are there any particular groups, any particular kinds of organized crime, like, I don't know, I'm thinking like the drug cartels of the old days, like the Medellin cartel. Are there cartels like that kind of specialize in this kind of crime? And
Yeah.
And how do they go about actually recruiting these money mules?
There's two sides to that coin. There's the national security side, where you'll hear about Russian or North Korean actors, which are state sponsored. We refer to them as state sponsored. That's our foreign countries, and they're doing these same schemes. So not everybody is good old honest, these days. Even these countries do the same things under the same guise. They'll do criminal.
Isn't North Korea kind of notorious for
Yes.
doing these things?
Right.
Yep. And then the other side of the coin, and I'll let the other guys chime in here, is just our regular everyday criminals in Russia who aren't state sponsored. In many cases, we like those because the Russian government tends to give those people up first and adhere to our search warrants and subpoenas for those bad guys, in the sense that we won't go after the other bad guys that they're not going to let us get. Yeah, so there's two coins there, and then we have our own stateside individuals, CONUS, in the United States, that participate in the same activity, the same criminal behavior. And yep, it's the same drug lords and other groups that you're used to hearing about. They just adapted to the environment of the modern world and found a new way to launder and make money.
But one of the most interesting things that I got from you, Chris, was a big surprise. We were having one of our breakfast meetings one time, and I asked you the question, well, does the FBI ever exchange information with organized crime? And the surprise was you said yes. Tell a little bit more about that.
I don't know what he's talking about.
Good response.
Yeah, so it's no surprise that the FBI has sources, and they're very clear about that. We had a saying at the FBI, and they still do, that today's informants become tomorrow's subjects. And so sometimes, we'll work with somebody who is known to be involved in to some lesser degree in criminal behavior. Because Janet, as you know, with sources and getting information, sometimes the only way to embed yourself with that information is to talk to somebody who's already dirtied up and involved in the criminal behavior or activity. And sometimes that comes in the form of, a relationship of give and take and payments. The one we're all familiar with. Yep, and the one we're all familiar with, which is the government has leeway in what's known as judicial discretion, which was my favorite saying and probably one of the most frustrating ones at the same time, because the prosecutors could choose to whether or not they would go after certain areas or individuals, and they can choose with that judicial discretion to use it liberally and as part of an agreement not go after somebody or forgive them for their past wrongdoings and not make that a prosecutable offense, all while this person may be getting paid from the bad guys or through us, in order to gain that information.
Steve, you look like you were going to say something.
Well, I was going to go back to this concept of data in today's day and age. As Doyle is mentioning, he's working with many companies at a larger scale, but take the mid-sized bank that I work for. On a daily basis, we get over 2 billion security events in our logs a day. And of course, we don't have the people to go through each line item and see if that's something bad or not. So we use tools that pull out anomalous behavior or correlate a bunch of incidents together to say that we need to go take a look and do an investigation. But we see things like probing. So the bad guys in China will test our systems to see if we have vulnerabilities. We see regularly bigger attacks on bigger scales. If you take some big events that happened that were correlated, we have China gathering personal information. They broke into Equifax and took out a whole bunch of data that most of us didn't know was even there. They took, I think, 79 million records from Anthem Insurance. They haven't moved that into, they haven't monetized that yet. They're just collecting data for use later.
Wait, can I follow up on that?
Yeah.
Were those the two big data breaches that were reported like a few years ago with Anthem and Equifax?
Yes.
And it was proven to be
announced the Chinese that were responsible for the attack.
Wow.
So as Chris mentioned, we do have these nation state attackers. We regularly see traffic coming from nations that we block. Those nations are on the OFAC list. OFAC stands for Office of Foreign Asset Control. So in order to make sure that we're not funding terrorism groups, we as a country make sure that we're not doing that. They put together lists. My job is to make sure that as a bank, we don't transfer money and we don't allow any communication to those on the OFAC list. So the first thing we do in that is block Ukraine and block Russia and block Yemen. So any systems that sit in those countries, we don't allow them to talk to us as the first layer in preventing attacks. Now, certainly there's other ways around, as mentioned earlier, these VPNs. I think another topic you want to talk about in more detail later is Tor. But basically, we see attacks every day. How do we keep our company safe? It used to be that you took this hard, crunchy exterior, soft, melted interior like a M&M. Or the traditional way to look at that was a castle model where you had one gate, one big doorway going in and out. In today's environment, especially as you move to the cloud, you've got many, many, many more entry points. So the way to look at that now is you've got Customs and Border Protection along with Port Authority. How many different shipments and people are coming into this country on a daily basis? It's not easy to maintain that. And so on a security side, it's definitely not easy either. We do something called defense in depth or building strong security stacks of tools that we deploy to prevent, detect, and help us have enough information to do responding. What do we occasionally see? We see insiders doing stuff they shouldn't, using anomalous behavior detection. We block what we call stopping stupid. We block users inadvertently sending information off that, oh, I didn't know all of those, all that column of data that had bank account numbers was in that spreadsheet. So stopping stupid. We see malicious, we see inadvertent, and we see misconfiguration as the core pieces there. And one of the things as a bank is seeing what happens to other banks and being able to share that. So recently, Capital One had, what was it, 102 million identities taken out of a database in the cloud. And we did a serious self-look to make sure that we were not exposed to the same vulnerabilities that allowed an attacker to steal the data. Some of the things that we're seeing.
Do you share enough information among different institutions to understand what the vulnerabilities are?
Yes, great question. So we have an information sharing council between the banks. It's official. You have to register to sign up, and there's a lot of officialness around it to make sure that only authorized people are allowed into this special cabal, for lack of a better term. But we classify the data we share into the traffic light protocol, TLP. And however we classify that data defines who we can share it to. So red, TLP red means only those people listening currently to this discussion can talk about and share that amongst themselves. TLP amber, you can share it with your colleagues that you do business with, perhaps your MSP that does your data center. And you can tell them, hey, there's an attack. Here's how it was described. Keep it within our group. Then there's green that you can share even broader, and white means it's public to the world. So we definitely classify this, and we do share. My team
one of the
on a
things
daily
I think,
basis.
Doyle, with your customers from your information security company, I know that you deal with this too. How do your clients share information?
It's a great question. They don't necessarily share it directly with each other, but that very high vantage point that I described earlier, we see so much of a biggest swath of all the businesses, period, that if something happens to somebody, we note that, and if it seems to happen to several of them within a particular industry or a category or a vertical of some kind, we can let the others know within that category. Hey, if you're in banking or finance or transportation or whatever it is, to tell their colleagues this is happening, or for them to ask. They do ask about their own category frequently, and there's reporting and things that we give to them to give them that visibility, because that's one of the most powerful things we can provide is letting everybody else know that it's happening and developing a method to deal with that attack that instantly applies to all the rest of them that will probably see it soon. We're ready for it. It takes one first sacrificial lamb that might click on something bad. That one person is hopefully the only one that's ever compromised, but we always have to learn from that first one, and ideally it spreads around fast.
We call that community protection. So sharing it back to the community. If we see a unique attack, we share it out, and then they can respond and detect to see if it already happened to them or prevent it from happening in the future.
Well, what's the scary?
Oh, go ahead.
I just want to know what's the scariest cybersecurity breach incident that each of you guys can think of. The scariest thing, the thing that scares you the most.
For us, our business is built on trust. And so we want to maintain that customer trust. And if we lose their data and they have to go off and get rid of credit cards and freeze their accounts and do all of that, we lose the trust. So protecting the customer data from being breached is really a critical piece for us.
Well, but what's the scariest actual event that you've seen?
OPM.
It's TLP red.
OPM.
Yeah, I lost my data in the OPM incident as well. So Chris, go ahead and talk about that.
OPM was the Office of Personnel Management of the government, where China, and I know a lot more about, see, this is the frustrating thing about when we disclose information to the American public in general. about an incident such as the Sony North Korea incident, we massively and quickly declassify a lot of information in order to say, hey, we know it was them. But when it came to OPM, we said it was China, and everybody goes, oh, it's not really China. And then I can tell you, because I know, I know other stuff that we couldn't disclose that, yes, it indeed was. And OPM stores all the background checks of every individual that has a classification. So as an FBI agent, I had top secret with the highest level of classification. And without going further in the depth, they know everything now about me, my entire past, every disclosure, everything, every little thing that you can possibly think of on anybody. And you can develop now a targeting package based on those individuals for anything. So the fact that they got all those millions of records going back to the 1980s on every single individual, which is the scariest, known as your SF88. That is your background form.
Yes, standard form, SF88, right.
Yep.
Doyle.
I think the scariest thing I saw about a year to 2 years ago, there was a wave of ransomware that swept around that was a few things at once. It was the result of us, we were watching them get better at zooming in on what their perfect target was. What's the right amount to charge? Should it be, $100 to $1 million? No, it should be, let's say, $50,000, aimed at, private companies or government entities or hospitals, and they kind of zoomed in on state and local government levels and hospitals and things, particularly the state and local government stuff, to where they would be willing to pay. It's a low enough threshold of pay. Let's just pay it and forget it. But it's a juicy enough target to where they're just not cyber savvy to where they're going to have a good defense up and running. To know that they're just low hanging fruit to go pick off this category of victim one after the other, knowing that those will get paid. It was very lucrative. It was also, it felt very state sponsored. It was very centrally a North Korea thing. And this is a country that is, by being under sanction, they were literally just trying to raise revenue to run their country. That's what was the motivator to do that. So the motivation was strong. The target was well chosen. The threshold, I watched them as a data person, machine learning enthusiast. You optimize and you zoom in on the best thing. They really zoomed in on the best thing, and they really exploited that kind of, across the board in high volume. I think it's less now, but to protect against that and to watch those victims just really suffer, because if you don't have a good way to deal with that, to literally lose everything and have to start over is just the worst for any business, any organization, really. So, I mean, that was a big.
Speaking of ransomware, this past week,
yes,
there was a ransomware incident in Germany, and somebody died.
Yes.
A hospital got hit. Somebody died.
There you go.
Yeah, because the hospital couldn't take the patient coming there, and they went, by the time they got to the next hospital, they were too far gone to survive. Yep. I was just going to ask, you were talking about this in the past tense. It doesn't sound like it's in the past tense.
It is ongoing, but there was a real wave of it that ramped up. It really peaked. I think it's less now, but it is certainly not nothing. It is still something that happens, but there's a wide variety of things that happen. That just stood out to me because we kind of watched it grow from small. We watched it be the thing that was growing for a while. And as the data person counting things up, I saw that as part of all the things we count up. It really emerged and was strong and dominant for a while.
We only have about 10 minutes left. Just giving you a little time warning here. Okay. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and on Doyle's side, the data showed the tuning and optimization of the attackers.
Exactly. They were, like any good marketer or any digital person, just optimize and get better.
Yeah. One of the things that I got asked by a couple other authors, I reached out and said, what would you like to hear from this panel? And a fellow Sisters in Crime author in Sacramento, Karen Phillips, suggested to have each person spend 1 minute and say, if I'm totally naive with cybersecurity, information security, what single thing would you recommend I get familiar with? And with Janet, I'll give you your turn too when it gets to you. What would you like, what single thing now that you've heard this, would you like to know more about? And I'll start this out. We haven't discussed Tor, the darknet. Tor, T-O-R, stands for the onion router. And it basically is layers and layers thick. And every message goes into this darknet through layers and layers of encryption, then layers and layers of decryption. That's why they call it the onion router. And the thing is that things that happen over the darknet are totally anonymous, absolutely totally anonymous. So you could do everything from hiring a hitman, great for murder mysteries, to doing human trafficking, drug deals, and so much is happening on the darknet. And it's something that people can probably wrap their head around by just reading a few sources. And the darknet's in every one of my novels in one way or another. Steve, what do you suggest?
Well, we're talking to authors and readers. So I'm going to suggest some books if you want to learn more about it. The Viagra email spam that tried to do pharmaceuticals. A book called Spam Nation by Brian Krebs is a good book to read. It talks about all the Russian activities. And by the way, as a business, the last thing you want is Brian Krebs calling you up to tell you you've been hacked. He does that quite frequently. Another book is Sandworm by Andy Greenberg, and he's talking largely about the Ukraine and ransomware and destructive malware, and NotPetya as an example in there. And then finally, what the U.S. and Israel did to Iran and the nuclear power industry, and that was Countdown to Zero Day by Kim Zetter. So those are three good
talking
books
about
that talk
Stuxnet.
about that.
Yeah, Stuxnet.
Yep, and Stuxnet.
Doyle.
I'll just throw one more book on the pile because again, cyber is not my background, but to learn more about that stuff, to read a few bits, my favorite one was one called Worm, which I think Russ has handy and he'll hold up there really quickly. And that's one where it is about the creation of a worm, a self-propagating piece of software that does what it does and it spreads throughout the world. And then maybe it does stuff once it's called into action by a master commander. It's a really interesting technological story, but it's a story about somebody motivated to do a thing toward a certain goal and to watch people behind that and to pick up bits of technology along the way to see how they did that and who was motivated to do what. That taught me a lot about a specific kind of thing, and for every kind of thing, there's probably some writing about it in a long form like that is, entertaining. While you're getting an education, you're being entertained. So read those, and then, to this audience, go create some more, ideally.
Chris, what about you?
Yeah, I would recommend that, and I'm not going to go the book route in this case. I would recommend that everybody visit daily a website of their choosing, but one as an example would be bleepingcomputer.com. And the reason why you would go there, since you're all putting it in your browser now, bleeping computer, as you can imagine, is a little play on words based on the joke, but I go there daily, and that's where I get a lot of my news as it relates to, there's like ZDNet, and there's lots of others that you could go to, but that's where I get on the recent vulnerabilities, maybe with that, Chrome is having, maybe I missed something with another web server, and there's some kind of vulnerability out there. Maybe there was a massive ransomware at a healthcare company that didn't quite make, national news. It's going to be on there. And it's just a good place. And what I tell people is go down that rabbit hole when you're reading the article and you're like, what the heck is a SaaS, software as a service? All right. Then you just stop what you're doing, open up another browser, Google that real quick, come back to what you're doing so it makes sense. Because, in the cyber world, we make everything sexy by adding a bunch of acronyms, and it makes it sound a lot harder than it actually is.
Yeah, I will mention one other one. The one that I use for information like that is mainly every day is CyberWire. And again, that's free.
Absolutely.
it's a daily and weekly that's free. And CyberWire always, I think the Bleeping Computer and CyberWire are kind of complementary in a way. Janet, we got about 2 minutes left.
I was just going to say, I don't, aside from Russ's cyber books, I don't have any particular text to recommend. But the one thing that really fascinates me, and I'm concerned about how some of the changing technology about what you can do with like photoshopping pictures and distributing misinformation on the internet to make it increasingly difficult to separate fact from fiction. And we're reaching the point with the technology where you can create videos, do things with photos that look to most people like it's a legitimate photo.
Deep fakes.
And that's really breaking down the barriers between that kind of hard wall where you used to be able to tell, okay, this is true and this is false.
And I think one of the things that we stayed away from in this panel, because it takes a whole panel of its own, and we're currently in the middle of an election. And
are we?
So keep in mind that the VoucherCon our session will be released, broadcast in October. We'll be about 3 weeks away from Election Day when people are watching this. And it's going to be a whole unbelievable experience to try to sort through the misinformation, as Janet has talked about it. We're all in for an experience that I think none of us is looking forward to.
Well, if I could quickly throw out a book title after all, now that we're talking about the election, is Jane Mayer, a writer for The New Yorker, wrote a book called Dark Money. And if you really want to kind of understand how the money from dark sources is fueling this election, read that and weep.
Well, okay. Thank you all. And we will, any of you are open, I hope, to getting questions from the people who look at this session. I'm going to give contact information, email addresses for all 5 of us on the panel to Michelle Dreyer and Karen Phillips at VoucherCon 2020, and they'll provide that to the attendees. With that, thanks a lot, and I believe that we are finished.
Thank you.
Take care.